Welcome to another video. So today I'm going to be talking about my must-haves, or all the things that I use to spray the edges of my own books, as well as how I make my stencils. So the Fourth Wing DIY Sprayed Edges book video has gone over pretty well. I'm not necessarily surprised because people were pretty upset, like myself, that they did not get the sprayed edges when they ordered the book. So I figured I would put together exactly what I'm using to spray my edges. I've sprayed edges of some additional books since then, some future videos that will be coming out, but I wanted to go through all the things I use as well as how I make my stencils. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. Okay, so I have all of my stuff spread out over here, but I will start first with the things you need, or what I use to wrap my books before we even get started on spraying the edges. So I am using like shipping paper. So this is like packaging paper or shipping paper, but you can really use just about anything. I would recommend something a little bit on the thicker side, so maybe like cardstock, over something like wrapping paper, just because it's thinner and you don't want the chance of any of the paint like soaking through what you're using onto like the covers of your books. So anything with a thicker type of paper would be just fine. And then I use masking tape. So I just like the way that masking tape molds a little bit better, especially when you're trying to tape around like the binding to protect the spine of the book. I really like the way that masking tape just molds really well to that. So then the next step in the spraying process is to clamp your book. Now, as I mentioned in the Fourth Wing video, it's really best to use wood on either side of the book so that you're not clamping directly onto the cover of the book, because you can dent it and damage it, whereas the wood provides a solid, clean, flat surface to smush your book. It also lets you tighten it a lot more than you would want to if you were just tightening directly onto the actual, hardback of the book. So we always have lots of wood lying around the house. Right now we're putting up a fence, so these are actually pieces of the pickets that we cut off. I really like the thickness of the pickets, so we're looking at probably 3/4 of an inch to an inch in thickness. I really like. And then you want it to be as big as your book. These pieces are a little bit longer than the books are, but I don't have any trouble spraying even with them a little bit longer. You don't want them crazy big, like compared to the size of your book, because then it's going to be hard to get like into the edges with the spray paint. And you don't want them too small either, because you're limiting where you can clamp when the wood is smaller than the size of the book. Then you need to have clamps to clamp the book together. Now, when I did the Fourth Wing video, I was using just what I had, or what we had for clamps just at our house, but I have since purchased clamps specifically for spraying edges of books. Now, all of these clamps are from Harbor Freight, and I didn't spend more than $15. So I got 2 sets of these smaller clamps. They're plastic, but I have so far sprayed all of my big Harry Potter books with these, and I had absolutely no issue with the size. So these were plenty big enough to clamp even the size of the thick Harry Potter books. And I use these on the front edges of the books. So the part where you're going to be spraying the pages, I use them on the 2 front ends. And then I picked up 2 of these bigger style clamps, and these are metal, and they offer a few different ways to tighten them up, which I really liked. And I use these on the spine side. So on both corners of the spine, I use these bigger clamps. Now, you can just spray your book completely one color. I have done that with a few of my books. But if you'd like to have the fancy stenciled edge like I did on my Fourth Wing book, then you need to either make or purchase a stencil. So I make all of my stencils, and towards the end of this video I will show you exactly how I make my stencils. So I'm not going to go too much into that right now. But I do use a Cricut Explore Air 2, and I use the Cricut stencil film. So this is the Cricut brand stencil film. Now, I have seen that there are people on Etsy selling the stencils, so if you don't have a Cricut, you can actually purchase at least the Fourth Wing stencils on Etsy. But you could probably, some of those shops may be doing like custom stencil orders where you can, request certain things and they can make them. So that's a great option if you don't have a Cricut. The last thing you're going to need to spray your edges is spray paint. Now, you can also use an airbrush machine, but I imagine that most of us don't have an airbrush machine. You can also hand paint your edges, I believe with like watercolor, but I've found that if you're going to stencil, one of the easiest ways to do this at home is spray paint. Now, I have tried 2 different types of spray paints. One worked and one didn't. So I haven't obviously tried the plethora of spray paints out there, but I have used one brand and type that has worked well, and one that did not. So the one that did not, I tried was a metallic gold, and part of me thinks it was a mix of the fact that it was metallic versus a matte. I'm not really sure, but all I know is that it did not work. So I went back to the tried and true, which I honestly use for most projects. I will also say that someone on the Fourth Wing video did mention that it would be important to look at acid-free spray paints because you don't want, acid messes up book pages. We all know that. Now, when I did a search, it kind of said the brand I use, or the type I use, is acid-free, but I don't really know, so don't take my word for it. I'm not 100% sure. But I use the Krylon Fusion all-in-one 5x adhesion in matte colors only. So the matte I've found is what makes it stick to the pages. Anything like satin, glossy, metallic, in my experience thus far, has not stuck to the pages. Now, when I did Fourth Wing, I just sprayed it directly from the can. And then when I was at Walmart the other day, I found this bad boy. So this is a Rustoleum Stay Grip Easy Slide On Grip, fits any spray can, and this thing has been a lifesaver. So it literally just slides on to the spray paint, you line it up, and then you just pull the trigger and it'll spray. It has allowed me to get a much more consistent, even spray, and my finger doesn't cramp. So I'm doing my Harry Potter books. That will be a video coming out later. But there are 7 books in that series, and spraying all of those books with just the little top part, not interested in that. This thing has been a lifesaver. So that is everything that I have been using to DIY spray the edges of my own books. And now I'm going to show you exactly how I have been making my stencils. This is one of the most important steps of this process because you need to make sure that you're making your stencil the right size for the book that you're going to be spraying. So you're going to want to be measuring the page width of the book. So I like to get the hardback portion out of the way and then make sure the book is sitting upright with the pages pushed together. And then you just measure with whatever you have for a ruler is fine. So this is just under 1.5 inches. So I'm going to say I don't want my stencil any larger than 1 inch for this book. That's going to be the best way to make sure that it looks nice, where you have a little bit on either side, but it's large enough where you're still going to be able to spray it easily. I have always had pretty good luck on Etsy finding everything that I need, so I pretty much only go here to get SVGs. So here I looked up Apple Silhouette SVG. Now the silhouette portion of the lookup is important because you want a solid design. Now if you look at this first apple, you'll see the stem and the leaf are separate from each other. You don't want that. The reason you want a solid, silhouette is because when you're making it into a stencil, any extra pieces or details are going to make it a lot more difficult to transfer. You also want to make sure that you don't have super, super thin pieces. So a lot of these stems are really thin. That's going to make it hard on you too. The apple I ended up picking's got a pretty thick stem and pretty thick leaf, and it should be pretty easy to remove and place. Downloading files off Etsy can be kind of complicated sometimes. You do need to do this on a computer. You go to Purchases, go to the order, click Download Files, and then it takes you to this page where you can then click Download. Now the file or item is going to save in your downloads on your computer. It does save as a zip folder most of the time because you often are getting multiple file types when you buy these. You can cut the whole folder out and paste it elsewhere. I just needed the SVG, so I just went into the folder, went to SVG, and pulled the apple filled out. So I cut it and then moved it over into my documents, pasted it. That part is important because it is a zip file, so you want to cut and then paste. And then I'll be able to pull it from my documents into Cricut. To make my stencils, I use the Cricut Standard Grip Matte and Cricut Flexible Stencil Film. I know that you can get probably off-brands for both of these. I've heard the mattes are, you know, great. I haven't really heard anybody say anything like poor about the off-brand mattes, but I've only ever used the Cricut brand stencil film. So with something like this, I would say probably you want to go with the name brand, but I can't say that for 100% because I haven't tried like off-brand for either the matte or the stencil film. So you're going to open up Cricut Design Space, click New Project, and then on the left-hand side, we're going to click Upload, Upload Image, Browse, and then I saved it in my document, so I'm just going to scroll until I find it, select it, open. Looks good. Then we're going to click Upload, and now it is in there as an option, so we're going to select it and add it to our canvas. So on the canvas, obviously, it's set up just like our mats, so the grid system like our mats. We are sizing this down pretty far, so I'm going to increase the size of my grid so it makes it a little bit easier for me to see. We did measure our book, so we decided that we didn't want our stencil any wider than 1 inch. So I'm going to size the apple down where the width is 1 inch. The height is not as important in this situation, though depending on your stencil, you do want to be paying attention to the height, you know, just depending on what you're going to be stenciling on the side of your book. I'm going to move it around the grid and make sure that it fits into the 1 inch section, which there's no reason it shouldn't because we knocked it down to 1 inch. And then I'm going to duplicate it. I'm going to have 4 on this book, so I'm going to duplicate it 3 times so that I have 4 in total. Now, I will be honest with you, I am very novice with the Cricut, if you haven't already noticed. I don't know how to do a whole lot. I do know how to do this much. So take my tutorial for what it is. It's going to be very basic. But now we've got all 4 apples, so we're ready to move on. When placing the stencil down on the mat, you want to make sure that you're placing stencil material up and the paper or removable side down. So now we're ready to make it. So I click Make It in the top right hand corner, on mat, confirm your mat size. And then I have never had any luck with grouping them before and having them actually stay grouped after I click Make It. So I always have to move my little pieces around. Right here, I'm just making sure that they're gonna fit on the piece of stencil that I have on my mat because I'm always using up scraps and stuff that I have. So I'm not usually ever using like a full sheet. So I'm just making sure that they all fit. And then I go ahead and click Continue. You're gonna confirm the base material, which I'm now realizing says iron on while doing this voiceover when it should probably say stencil, but thus far it's worked for me. So like I said, novice Cricut user here. You are going to load the mat into the machine, and then you can go ahead and press go and get to cutting. For getting the stencil piece off of the rest of it or separated from the rest of it, I really like to use this pointed Cricut tool. I'm not exactly sure what the technical term is for it, but I do know that you can get these off-brand off Amazon. Like, you do not have to buy the Cricut Tool Set. This is really the only one I use in the tool set, to be honest with you. But I just go around the edges and lift it a little bit to be able to separate it. You really want to make sure that you're not, like, obviously poking any holes in it or bending it, because then it's not going to sit on the book super well. Once I have it off, I obviously try not to touch the sticky part, and then I press it to the book, and I just press really hard and firm and try to make sure that the stencil is pressed as tightly as possible to the book so that you don't get any paint underneath. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this video was helpful in showing you what you need to be able to spray your own book edges at home, as well as how to make stencils if you have a Cricut. I have been really enjoying spraying my books recently, ever since I made the Fourth Wing book, and I'm actually currently working on 2 book series right now. I'm doing my full set of Harry Potter hardbacks, but that video probably won't be out until later in the year because the dust jackets I ordered are not shipping until October. And then I'm also working on my Twilight books, which is actually the stencil I cut out in this video is for one of those. So I'm hoping that that video is going to be out soon. But if you enjoyed this video and you'd like to see more like it, definitely hit that subscribe button. Any questions, comments, concerns, as always, leave them down in the comments section. And I'll see you in the next one.